This episode is brought to you by Sterling Soap Company. Fellas, you've heard the phrase, look good, feel good, right? But why not add smell good to that too? That's where Sterling Soap Company comes in. First, Sterling Soap is 100% natural and has a wide variety of bath soaps, shave soaps, beard balm, lotions, and cologne. Second, there's a scent just for you. How about burgundy? Yeah, it's more than a color. The Sterling Soap folks blend natural essential oils with hints of mahogany, golden amber, and sandalwood. Or how about D503, an intensely masculine scent inspired by Legend by Mont Blanc. And third, you will feel good about the price. For just a little more than you'd pay at the grocery store, Sterling Soap will leave you feeling clean, refreshed, and ready for whatever's next. Give Sterling Soap a try today. Visit sterlingsoap.com.
This year at the NFL Draft, dreams will be realized and lives will be changed forever. While future stars take the stage, you can elevate your own game. The Sports History Network is giving away a $75 gift card to Sterling Soap Company, offering 100% natural, fan-approved, locker room tested, stellar grooming products. Step into legendary status and enter now at sportshistorynetwork.com/giveaways. That's sportshistorynetwork.com/giveaways. This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello once again, sports fans, and welcome to the podcast that gives you the best of sports from back in the day. And coming to you from the Sports History Network, this is the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast. I'm Dana Augusta, along with my co-host Charles Combs, and we will go deep in the woods to discuss and possibly debate sports history topics that you didn't know you needed to know. So pull up a chair, sit back and relax, and pump up the volume for a dose of sports history info and maybe even a few laughs. So with all that being said, here is the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast, a member of the Sports History Network. Hey, hi, and hello, and welcome to the brand new Historically Speaking Sports Podcast. I am your co-host, Dana Augusta, and joining me for this edition and for hopefully many more editions to come, my new co-host, my longtime friend. He's like a brother to me, and I'm so happy to have him on board. Something on a permanent basis as my co-host, Mr. Charles Combs. Charles, thank you for coming in, and thank you for also agreeing to do this with me, man. I really appreciate that.
And no problem at all, man. As I told you before, man, I'm deeply humbled, and it's an honor to even be considered for this, man. And you have always been someone that I had a high deal of admiration and respect for, and someone that I've always, throughout our nearly 30-year brotherhood, held in high esteem, man. So happy to be aboard, man.
Yeah, like you said, we've been knowing each other for almost 30 years, and you had brought that up to my attention a few days ago, in which I found that really hard to believe because time has flown by so quickly. But one of the things that I mostly admired about you is the fact that not only are you very knowledgeable about sports, but also that you're very passionate. And one of the reasons why I picked you is because of your passion for it. The best way to describe it is that I've always been like the even keel, the nice, kind of like the nice guy, the even keel guy, the guy that's really kind of, don't let too many things get to him. You, on the other hand, especially all the years that we play ball together, man, you're very volatile, and you're very you have conviction, and that's one of the things about you that I really like is that your conviction of what you believe in, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on, is because that you believe you mean what you say, and you say what you mean, and that's one of the things that I really admire and like about you.
Yeah, well, I can be a loose cannon at times, and I've kind of matured over the years, man. But as Apollo told Rocky in Rocky IV when he was considering fighting Drago, and Rocky was talking about that ain't us up there anymore. We changed. Apollo told him, look, man, can't change what you really are. You can forget all this stuff around you. And that's kind of like Me too. Obviously, you evolve over time, but to a degree. But in most instances, you still the core of who you are, no
Right.
matter how much time passes.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Um, like I said, you're a big sports fan, obviously, because you agreed to do this. And over the years, one of the things that I've noticed about you is the fact that you are very, very, very knowledgeable about sports history and about just random things. A lot like me, as they say, birds of a feather flock together. Tell us about your fandom. What are some of the things that you, as a fan, is identifiable to you?
Oh, a lot of things, man. But just in the for the purpose of being as short as I can, I just pretty much it's like a little bit of everything. Because growing up, we kind of both grew up as kids in the '80s and all of that with '70s babies. Um, growing up, we always played everything.
Yeah.
About football, about jumping bikes, and boxing, wrestling. Just so as a result, I've always had a multitude of interests and stuff. I've always loved basketball. My first basketball memory, and I'm sure you remember this, is like I was a little kid. A movie came on BET called "The Fish That Saved Pittsburgh."
Of course, of course. That's a classic. That's a
Yeah,
classic. That's basically like the slap shot. That's basketball's version of the movie Slapshot.
correct. And it was like Dr. J, Julius Irving. I still remember when he pulled the car on the side of the road and told what's her name? She was in The Color Purple, and
Oh man,
she was in The Color Purple. Suge Avery. She
yeah,
played Suge Avery in The Color Purple. That was her date. He pulled her to the side, man, and had on some Stacey Adams and a V-neck sweater with the drop top, and took the basketball. They were just doing all kind of incredible stuff, fully decked out. So that got me towards basketball, and then obviously football. First memory of boxing was the 1981 Sugar Ray versus Tommy Hearns fight. This was in the closed circuit TV days. Here,
yeah,
this is before you
absolutely
can even
right.
get the pay per view in your home. I still remember pulling for Tommy, and when he lost, I cried. I cried. From earliest football memory that I can remember was to catch Dwight Clark over Everson Walls. But everyone forgets that Danny White had driven them all the way down 128 to 27. He had driven them to the 49er 45, and in typical
Right.
Danny White fashion, can't feel the rush. Fred Dean Saxon, he fumbles the ball. That's the
Yeah.
ball game, and that's the beginning of the Niners dynasty.
No, no, that
Then
now,
always
from my
always loved
perspective
baseball too.
of the catch, I don't think I've ever admitted this online, but the one thing that I remember about that was the fact that you mentioned that when Thomas Hearns lost to Sugar Ray Leonard and you cried, right?
Yes,
I cried when Dwight Clark made that catch because I was a Cowboys fan and I was wearing a Drew Pearson jersey sitting in my parents' living room, and I cried. I threw the jersey in the corner, and I swore I will never root for the Cowboys again, and I never did. And that was when I converted to the Chargers. That was the moment, and I never. It's like I've never rooted for the Cowboys. I am a devout Cowboy hater, and it even grew over the years when he became sad and Tom Landry and the way that Tom Landry left and all of that. So that
hmm
was the impotence of me becoming a Charger fan, and it was from that play. And you're right, Danny White. If it wasn't that last drive, he threw a pass to Drew Pearson and got to midfield. And if that game would have happened today, it would have added another 15-yard penalty because I think it was Eric Wright, the defensive back for the Niners.
correct,
Packer was a horse. It was a horse collar.
correct.
It would have been another 15 yards. So who knows what would have happened? And that was the same day as the infamous Freezer Bowl between the Chargers and Bengals.
Correct. I remember that. And then, everybody obviously remembered the week before
Oh, the epic in
the game.
Miami, the Chargers
And then,
Dolphins game.
yeah, then they had who was it? I think it was David Woodley as the quarterback. They were getting blown out, and then they brought in the last thing you want to see is the old grizzled veteran off the bench in relief, the old veteran Don Strock.
Yep. And
it
Stroud
does.
tore the defense apart. I mean, he could
Correct.
not throw an incompletion. Everything he
Correct.
threw was on target.
Correct. And it was
But
just
then again, he held help because the Chargers defense in the early 80s were trash. Yeah, and I'm a Charger
yeah.
fan and I can say that. They were
It,
trash.
correct. And it was just struck over and over, struck the Tony Nathan, struck the Tony Nathan. Then they hit the hook and ladder, and it was just a a wild ball game. And then people always think of that game. Obviously the images of Kellen Winslow blocking the extra point, or blocking the field goal or what have you, and being carried off the field with the towel draped over his head. A lot of the Dolphins, I want to say Lyle Blackwood and his brother, they've always contended that Winslow was kind of being slightly hyperbolic or carrying on, that he wasn't really in as bad of a shape as he led on and all of that.
Yeah, yeah. I've heard stories like that, not only from Dolphin fans, but not only from the Blackwood brothers, but also from people that was in the Charger locker room, players that was like at the end of the game. I mean, they had to carry him off the field and stuff like that. And at the end of the game, he was in the locker room dancing, saying, "Hey, we're going to the AFC Championship game." One of the stories I heard, or I remember reading about that game was at the end of the game in the locker room, all of the offensive linemen took a bench from the locker room and put it in the shower. And all of the offensive linemen just sat on the bench in the shower because they were so tired that they couldn't even wash it. They just had to sit there in the shower, let the water just hit them, sitting on the bench because they couldn't move. They were that tired. And they looked at Winslow doing all of this, and they're like, and they just shook their heads, like, whatever, bro.
Wow, and that's interesting. And then, that's one of the reasons why I'm so excited to join you, because, in all of years that I've known you, I just learned something new today. And just all the time, I constantly learn new things from you, constantly, constantly. Because I've heard of the skepticism from the Dolphin standpoint, but was not aware that some of Winslow's own teammates had similar skepticisms.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that was like some of my memories. I know for years and years and years you've been a big basketball fan, and we're gonna get into more of the basketball, what's going on currently in the NBA, right? A little later on in the show. But right now, let's talk about this. In addition to, and you mentioned this earlier, in addition to your love of all the major sports, football, basketball, baseball, and all of that, you also have a very deep interest and also knowledge of a sport that I know a bit about, but I think you may know a little bit more about than I do, and that's boxing. And let's talk about that. Talk about your interest in boxing and what are the things about boxing that you really, really like, and what are the things that drew you to that sport?
I love boxing because, like as we came up in the '80s, it was pretty much the Ali era was over. But it was in the middle of the Larry Holmes era as far as heavyweight championships were concerned. But then they had four individuals, often referred to as the Four Kings, referring to Tommy Hearns, Sugar Ray Leonard, Roberto Duran, last but not least, the late great marvelous Marvin Hagler. And
Absolutely.
they carried the sport along with a lot of other fighters, guys like Aaron Pryor, Alexis Arguello, guys like that. And it was just kind of captivating watching it on Saturday afternoon. These were the days when the fights would come on Saturday afternoon, ABC, Wide World of Sports,
Yeah,
or
yeah, exactly right.
even CBS. And what I've always liked about boxing is, it's sort of a truth serum sort of sport, where it's like, other sports, a guy can be successful, or, for instance, like Darren Sharper with the Saints, right? He was
Right.
successful, won a Super Bowl with the, um, I know he won. I know he lost that Super Bowl with the Packers against the Broncos. I can't remember whether or not he was on the team the year before when they beat the Patriots.
I
But
believe
he,
he was. Don't quote me on that, but I think he was.
okay, but then he won the Super Bowl with the Saints, so he's this great guy. But then to find out subsequently, in some respects, he was a piece of crap, in a lot of
Yeah.
ways. Whereas like boxing, you it who you are as a person eventually manifest right there in the middle of the match. Hence why the old adage is you don't play boxing. Like if you are a chump or you have a lot of heart, if you're a chump, it eventually be
Exploited.
exploited.
You'll find out about it. You go.
You know,
It is the ultimate one-on-one test your manhood. This is what you're really about because there is nobody could block for you. Nobody could set a screen for you. It's
yes.
all you. And there's no running from it.
Yes, in case in point, even though we started off in the 80s, like in the early 90s when Evander Holyfield was champion and he had beaten Buster Douglas, who had beaten Mike Tyson, but before he could fight Mike Tyson had got sent up on his rape trial conviction, so he never got a chance to fight Tyson at that point. This was like 1991, 1992.
Right.
Therefore, based upon that, it was this perception that he was a fraudulent champion, a paper champion. What happens? Fights Riddick Bowe. I still remember sitting in the living room with my dad, all my uncles, all my brothers, all my friends. All of us like Holyfield is a chump, right? My dad is the only one like, no, he's the real deal Holyfield. Round 10 comes early in the round. He gets rocked with an uppercut from Riddick Bowe. He goes stumbling around the ring, and the whole room is like, "We told you he a chump. We told you he a punk." Then 30 seconds later, he gathers himself and just come firing back like a man possessed. And even though he would go on to lose that fight, he gained more respect in that one loss than all of his previous victories
Right.
combined, truly showing that even in the midst of defeat, that he was in fact the true champion. He in fact wasn't a chump, and he was in fact befitting of his moniker, the real deal Holyfield. And
Holyfield.
I love boxing because it's just those are some of the elements, and you pretty much get out of it what you put into it.
Right. I mean, and it's very interesting. Like I said, I didn't really watch a lot of boxing growing up. I did watch it, like like you said, in a similar situation where my uncles and dad and my grandpa would get together, they'll watch boxing, and I would sit there and watch with them. I really didn't gravitate towards it. I don't know if it was just a lack of interest, but I know boxing history. But as far as like being a fan of it, like truly like you are, no, you got me surpassed in that respect. But I do know a lot of the history, especially like the heavyweight division and stuff like that, which is the glamour division of boxing. But your knowledge is a lot of the other weight classes, welterweight, middleweight, and stuff like that. One of the things and you, like you said earlier, you learned a lot from me, but when it comes down to boxing, I've learned a lot from you, and this is where the situation comes in where one hand washes the other, so to speak, in this show, whereas, you have the knowledge of boxing that I don't have, right? But at the same time, it's fun listening to you when you talk boxing. It really is. And this is one of the welcoming additions to the show that I'm really looking forward to, really.
Oh, yes, sir. And I look forward to you as well, to it as well. And like I said, I learned a lot from you. And one final thing about boxing is the only sport where you can hit a 15-run home run, or you can score a 30 point touchdown, or you can hit, like you're no matter how you could be losing every second of every round, but you're always one punch from victory at all times. You could be
Right.
losing every second of every round. Fighter lands the right shot, it renders everything that happened prior to that punch moot. It doesn't matter. He's the winner. That's how George Foreman beat Michael Moore at age 45. He was losing every second of every round, getting beaten. He landed his money punch. Michael Moore is out like a light. Guess what? George Foreman is the new heavyweight champion of the world at age 45.
Yeah, and it's I was about to watch the Foreman movie not too long after he died, and I wanted to, but something came up and I really couldn't watch it, but I was very interested in it, in his life, about George Foreman. But yeah, I mean, like your expertise in boxing, I have an expertise in baseball and hockey that's unusual. Especially for a black kid growing up in Louisiana, I gravitated to hockey in the early '90s. And as a matter of fact, I'm sitting here watching, in between the Celtics Magic game, I'm also watching the Canadians and the Capitals. on TV. So that's very, but it's very interesting that, you come at it from a different perspective than I do, which could make the show very, very interesting. But like I said, baseball has been my thing. I've been a baseball fan longer than any other sport. Longer than I've been a football fan, longer than I've been a basketball fan. It's been baseball because that was the first sport I was really introduced to as a kid.
Okay. Well, yes, and I love baseball too. And even though I've always known that you loved hockey, never got a chance to ask what what made you gravitate to it, or what allured you about it.
Well, it was I'm gonna tell you when it was. It was in 1994 when the New York Rangers won the Stanley Cup over Vancouver, and I just like never really gave it a shot. The games were on ESPN. The Rangers had never won the Stanley Cup since 1940. It was 54 years since they won the Stanley Cup. And I was like, let me check this out. I've never watched a hockey game, so let me just watch it. And the rules got me kind of confused and everything else, what icing was and what offsides was and high sticking and all of that. So I started just kind of gravitating, just started kind of like reading about it, the rules and the history of it. And the more I started to watch it, the more I started to like it. And the more I started to be just like really interested in the nuts and bolts that what really makes it. And plus, they doing all of this on ice and on skates. And I'm like, you got to be really athletic to do all of those things. And not to mention that 94 Stanley Cup series between Vancouver and the Rangers was a very entertaining series that went 7 games. And Vancouver was in the finals for the first time in a well, not really long. There was an 81 or 82 they were in the finals against the Islanders, doing the Islanders dynasty. But it was one of those things where I used to love the fact that you could just run into people on the boards, and that was really fun for me. Like, oh yeah, that was a good hit, and stuff, and you don't get penalized for that. I mean, like, whoa, that's pretty cool. But it's not like something that if I was exposed to if I grew up like in Canada or grew up north where they had hockey, I probably would have tried it, knowing I can't skate worth a damn. But hey, why not?
Yeah, yeah, but shoot, that's what's up because I've had the pleasure through the years of going to a couple of Capital games. I've been to
Yeah,
probably
that's right.
like
It's
two
just
or
to let the
three.
people know that you live in Maryland, correct?
Yes, I live in the Silver Spring, Maryland area, which is basically just outside of Washington, D.C. Been here for almost 20 years. And, prior to that, we were down in Louisiana together, just
Yeah.
hooping, house music,
Yes. Yes.
just all kind of music, rock and roll. Just, you and I, we just immediately hit it off. I think when we first became friends, you were the only guy I knew that had an affinity for the brand new heavies and house music. I'm talking Robin S. I'm talking Crystal Waters. I'm talking, it's a name from way back that a lot of people may not know. Colonel Abrams,
Yes, sir.
the
Yes,
the
sir.
Colonel,
Absolutely, Colonel Abrams.
so and it was kind of cool to find somebody that's into some different things because as you said before, even though we had some similarities, we had different interests, but it was in a way where I was able to learn and experience new things from you, and hopefully the same was true for you.
Yeah, I mean when you and I met, I was like I tell the story all the time. Especially to my wife, I told her it's like when you and I met, it was like here's this guy that's basically another version of me, but is more of a fiery version of me. And we hit it off at the fact that we had so many things in common. And not only sports, but just outside of that. And we became fast friends at Southern University. And we both had the same major. We both had classes, a bunch of classes together.
Yes.
And it was like a natural kind of fit. And I think that here we are, almost 30 years later, we're doing this together. And I think that some of our professors might be proud of us. You know what I'm saying? So,
Yeah, I think so, man. I think so. And it's just, and as you mentioned before, it is hard to believe that that was nearly 30 years ago, and it's funny how quickly time passes, and it's just crazy how life works. But we've always stayed in contact, always been brothers, and then we finally get to kind of formally do what we've always done informally throughout the years.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I wanted to give the listeners a chance to um, basically not necessarily eavesdrop, but kind of like understand like our friendship at the same time. We talk about sports all the time when we talk, and basically this is like a lot of our phone calls. That we would get on the phone and talk about sports for hours, and it was one of those things we just came up with, and it seemed very natural. For me to talk to you about this because you know what you're talking about, and I know that right off. And it's an easy fit. It's an easy show to do, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And mostly because I'm doing this for the fun aspect of it. You know me, I love having fun. You know me,
Yes, sir.
I enjoy myself a good time, and you're the
Yes,
same
sir.
way. And we have a lot of stories about that's not necessarily meant for air, but still we. But we did have some fun back in the day, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this with you is because that you're very knowledgeable and you're very fun, and I think that you and I not only will have some very interesting conversations, maybe some debates along the way, which I'm also looking forward to because you and I had some debates in the past too, So that's one of the things that I'm really looking forward to with this show.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Absolutely. And then even when we do debate, it would be boring if we agreed all the time. But
It would,
even when
right?
even when I don't agree with you, I still always learn something. No, even when I don't agree with you, it's always something I learned, or it's always something like even if I don't agree with you, I could look at it from your perspective, and like, hey, I could see how you could look at it that way or come to that conclusion. Even though I don't agree with it, I could totally understand it and respect it.
Looking back on like doing that time that we was at Southern, and to give us like give the listeners a little peek behind the curtain, we played a lot of ball together, a lot of
Yes.
basketball together. We've had some times. There was this one particular time that I remember playing with you in one of the local parks around Baton Rouge that we would be searching for games when we were in college together. You didn't have anything to do. I didn't have anything to do one particular afternoon. And we would just go right around looking for where they hooping at. It was your city. You were a native of Baton Rouge. I'm the outsider, I'm from the country. You've been to my house before. And that's really like the rural area of Louisiana.
Yes.
Um, and we would go looking for games, and it was your city. That's one of the things that I really remember about us hanging out was the fact that you and I would just go looking for games, looking to hoop somewhere. You know, those riding around in my old Beretta, my old Chevy Beretta.
We're going way back now.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, we ride around. We used to call it, where I'm from, we used to call it head busting.
Yep.
We go ride around all, because, you conquer your hood, you run the hood. It's like, okay, then let's go over here. Let's go over here to the bottom or go over here to Scotland. It's nothing better than going to somebody else's hood or someone else stomping grounds and then running their court the entire day.
There's
It's
nothing
nothing
like it.
more
I mean, I
fun like
remember
that,
sometimes. I remember one day. Remember that playground we used to play at by the airport.
Yes, right
I
under
remember
the
one day
interstate. Yes.
we went over there. I couldn't miss. I could not miss. I was like, I gotta come back here again. You know.
hmm people don't remember that. I was telling my girlfriend about that. Like this, we go hoop and it would be like hordes of people at the court. 10 people got ups, and unless you really had clout, basically, if you get on the court and lose, you may as well go home or go someplace else because you're not coming back up on the court again, because everyone behind you has ups.
Right.
So as a result, it would be some knockdown, drag out ball games, even leading into fisticuffs a lot of times, even leading into other stuff a lot of times,
Right.
firearm involved. I've had to kind of flee the park a few times. And then, crazy how it is, I just turned 50. Looking back at it now, my 21-year-old self, they would shoot the day before, then I'll go right back to the same park the next day and play again, as if that
Yes.
didn't happen.
And we would think nothing of it. I mean, like where I grew up, there's a gym like there's a park less than 100 yards away from my house, right? You know that you've been there, and
Hmm.
they would be like shootings and fights and stuff going on in the park the day before or a few hours before, and we go back out there and play like it's nothing. Like, what happened, huh? We talking about? We would go, and that was just like those are some really great days. Like me riding, you and I riding around in my old beat up Beretta. You know,
Hmm. Yes, yes. Or you find out like old Nook, he shot. He said, man, he does that all the time, man. Don't worry
right?
about it. You know what I mean? He does that at least once a month. Don't worry about it. But looking at it from a 50-year-old perspective, it's like we were, I guess ignorance is bliss because we were stone crazy. You
Yeah,
know,
we
you
were.
you
We were.
you would,
We were.
you
We were.
know,
We were stone crazy, and we thought that we was invincible.
correct, correct. But I miss those days because I don't know what it's like. I don't know how often you get to get back now. I get to get back a few times a year, but a lot of those same places that used to be so vibrant and full and things, you go back to those places, it's just like ghost towns now because the kids
Yeah. They
they
don't
don't
play
they
no. They
don't
don't
play
play
anymore.
ball no more. It's like I was amazed a couple of days ago I went up right down the street. Where I live, kids out in the front yard playing ball. I mean, like hard down playing ball, and I'm like, that's something you really don't see anymore, which is truly unfortunate.
And it used to be our mentality because we would go to LSU a lot of times. I know,
Yep.
it kind of had died down, but you and I went to LSU a few times. We'll go hoop at the old LSU Armory. They don't even have that thing anymore.
No.
We'd be back there. They're like, man, you know who that is? That's Vernell Singleton or this guy from LSU. That guy, he all SEC. We like, dude, we weren't out there when he did it. It doesn't count. We don't care. So we don't care. Now, if you whoop me, I'll be the first person to give it up to you. But
Right.
I'm not going to just sit here and just let you have your way with me just because of who you think you are. You got to prove it. You got to
Yep.
prove it to me. You got to
Right.
prove it to me. You know what I mean? So, and I guess a lot of times that's a good way to approach life. A lot of times, you always got to, no matter what you do, you have to kind of prove yourself constantly. That's not a, that's a good thing sometimes.
Yep. Well, Charles, I am looking forward to doing more of this with you. This is the end of our first segment, and we're going to take a short commercial break, and we're going to come back, and we're going to do a little something I just started here on the podcast called Current Events, where we're going to take some sports headlines currently, and we're going to put a historical spin on them and get Charles to weigh in on what he thinks about them. So right after we take this break, we'll be right back. You're listening to the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast, a member of the Sports History Network. And ladies and gentlemen, we are back. You're listening to the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast right here on the Sports History Network. I am your host, Dana Augusta, with my new co-host of the brand new Historically Speaking Sports Podcast, Mr. Charles Combs. And just a reminder to everyone out there is that you could check us out on the various social media platforms. You can find us on Twitter or X. You could also find us on Instagram. You could find us on Blue Sky, and you also could check us out on Threads. And also, if you want to drop us a line to say hello, or you have some story ideas or some questions that you may have, you can check us out. Email us at the historically.speaking.sports@gmail.com. Once again, that email address is historically.speaking.sports@gmail.com. gmail.com. And right now, we're going to do a little something called Current Events. One of the big things that everyone is talking about here on this Sunday afternoon here in late April is the NFL draft that just occurred. And not necessarily anybody's talking about really Cam Ward going to the Tennessee Titans, but everybody is talking about Shedeur Sanders and his dropping like a stone in the NFL draft this past weekend. Finally goes in the draft. He goes to the Cleveland Browns, which have been bereft of a quarterback for God knows how long. But he goes to that not without some controversy. And Chuck, let's just start off with that, man. What do you think about Mr. Shedeur Deion Sanders, dropping the way that he did in the draft?
It's kind of interesting. It was hard to say because, as I told you before, I'm a Saints fan. And we could use a quarterback, but I told you I didn't really have a lot of confidence in investing a high pick in any of these quarterbacks. I would prefer that they kind of take their time because we're 7 players away and build both lines. With that being said, it was kind of shocking that he dropped that far. Obviously, we don't have all of the information, but you look at people like Jackson Dart and the guy that the Saints drafted, the dude played one season in 7 years, and the man is closing in on 30 years old. I'm being hyperbolic. He's about to turn 26. But you got to think that Shedeur is better than that guy. But, you always have to weigh risk versus reward. Maybe when they weighed that, maybe a lot of the potential baggage and distractions that he may bring aboard may perhaps not, the ratio may be off. So hence, they didn't pull the plug on that.
Well, one of the things that I heard, and this is some breaking news that I just read about earlier today, was that there was a prank phone call that he was drafted by somebody, and the prank phone call came from the son of the Atlanta Falcons defensive coordinator, which is that's kind of cruel, don't you think? That you hear stories like that all the time by his teammates or something like that would probably pull a prank on him like that, or pull a prank on their teammate and stuff like that, which is kind of I don't know if I would do that, but the son of the Atlanta Falcons defensive coordinator somehow got his phone number and prank called him as if he was a general manager or something, which is, I think that's really messed up to do something like that.
Totally. But the Atlanta Falcons, what else would you expect?
True that. I mean, I live in Atlanta, and it's like that is what people say about the fan base here in Atlanta, and I know I live here and all the things, but you got to call it the way it is. People have said that Atlanta has the worst fans in all of pro sports, and they're not lying. Because, and it's not really their fault, because Atlanta is such of a transit city. It's a lot like Miami, where they really don't have, like, the people that lived here is outnumbered by people that moved here, i.e. me. Who have fans of who is a fan of different teams other than the teams in Atlanta. Now, granted, I grew up watching the Braves. I'm not necessarily a Braves fan, but still, it is what it is. But you mentioned Jackson Dart, and I want to mention this quickly. Jackson Dart is the latest of a long line of Ole Miss quarterbacks that's going to the Giants that have had success. Of course, you had Eli Manning, who went to Ole Miss, but also going back to the 1940s, you had Charlie Connerly, who led the Giants to a couple of NFL championships in the 50s. He went to Ole Miss. So hopefully Jackson Dart will be, continue that lineage of great Giant quarterbacks, because the Giants, he's, of course, the heir apparent, because you got this year that you got, not only you have Jameis Winston over there wearing big blue, but you also have Russell Wilson, with his third team in 3 years. So this is going to be a very interesting time for Big Blue as they continue to rebuild.
Yeah, very peculiar quarterback room to say the least. The quarterback meetings should be really interesting and just be interesting to see what role was Russell Wilson and Winston would play in terms of from a veteran tutelage standpoint. It'd be
Right.
interesting to see what role they would play and whether or not they would be able to show dart the ropes and all of that, and just adequately you know, lead him and kind of help in the development of him because obviously due to the high pick investment and the trade, that's where they're putting their future chips in right there. If I could pivot back to Shador for just a second, it just like you mentioned, it was very cruel. And it's not surprising because, the Falcons, they got fined for pumping noise into the stadium. They got they blew the 28-3 lead, obviously. And it just, I still watch that fourth quarter at least once every 6 months because I love it. But anyway, and it's just like the cruel part is, and the irony of the entire thing is what Dion has meant to that city and that organization.
That's another
And
thing, right?
that's the irony, and the irony of everything that he has done for that franchise and that city. And then for them to do that, and it's one thing, okay, if you think the guy's gonna slip, if you think the guy isn't that good, that's one thing, man. But to sit here and rejoice in the man's free falling. You know,
Yeah,
the
that's
guy's a
another
kid.
thing, right?
He's a kid. Why,
Right.
why would you take joy and pleasure into that? He's a
Yeah.
kid, and for them to do that to Deion Sanders of all people,
Of all people. I mean, if you really think
you
about it, I
know,
mean, Deion Sanders for the Atlanta Falcons was the first bona fide superstar that franchise has had. The franchise had been around for almost 30 years before he showed up. And he was like the first bona fide superstar the Falcons have had. Forget about Barkowski, forget about Alfred Jenkins and stuff like that. They didn't have the 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 the, the persona. They didn't have the stardom that Dion brought to him coming from Florida State and also being a two-sport athlete in the early 90s and also playing for the Braves at the same time. So it was, for that to happen to somebody's son that meant what Deion Sanders had meant to this city is something that you have to that's kind of messed up. It really is. Um,
fireable offense
it
to
is.
me, fireable offense because
Yeah.
if you can't guard, basically,
Yeah, now the
in the,
defensive coordinator's son who did this,
I
but
know, but
still, that's kind of, messed up. You know what I mean?
you can't. This is a multi-billion-dollar business, and you can't adequately secure the trade secrets, so to speak.
Right.
Like key information that the fact that he can't secure that. Now, obviously, the deed itself is not the guy's fault, but you have to be a solid steward of the information that you are entrusted with.
Yeah.
And we can't punish the kid. You let the thing. And to my recollection, it's not like the Falcons were exactly the grits blitz,
Yeah.
or anything like that. So it's not like he's coaching anyway. Fireable offense.
It's crazy. One last thing about the draft. And you mentioned the Saints, and I wanted to bring this up since we're both from Louisiana. And a friend of mine had brought this up to my attention that I did not know this. And I'm not sure if you knew this either. Over the last 50 years, we're talking about going back to 1975, the New Orleans Saints are the only team in the NFL that had never drafted a quarterback in the first round.
They're the Saints, right? Yeah,
And I find
I
that hard to
believe it.
believe, but if you go back and think about it, you go back and look at it, once I went back and thought about it, it's like you're right. They don't draft quarterbacks in the first round. They're the only NFL team that have never drafted a quarterback in the first round.
I can believe it. They're the team that can nearly do the impossible, unprecedented impossible, but not the routine. Same team that against the Jaguars where they needed to make the playoffs, they pulled off this miraculous 8-play lateral to seemingly tie the game, and all they needed was the extra point, and John Carney missed it. Typical Saints. But
Yep.
It's
There's a
just
story. There's a story about that I'm gonna get into one other time. That's a long story. That was the cause of me and my wife's first argument. But anyway, moving on. Moving on. Keeping with football, but more on a more melancholy set of circumstances, more melancholy tone here is the passing this earlier this week of Steve McMichael, aka Mongo, the anchor of that great defensive line of the Chicago Bears in the 80s, part of that 80s, that famed 1985 Chicago Bears defense that every great defense is compared to. Born in Houston, Texas on October 17th, 1957, he played at the University of Texas from 75 to 80. He was the third pick of the, believe it or not, the third round pick, I should say, of the New England Patriots in 1980, but only spent 1 year with the Patriots. And there's a quote that I found of him that I want to read to you real quick, and I think is, kind of emblematic of how he felt about the Patriots. He said, quote, "Thank God New England got rid of me. Some teams, they want you to have a certain image. Other teams, like this one, talking about the Bears, they just want you to get down and dirty. I'm really proud to be a Bear. The Patriots, yeah, they thought I was a little weird, and I guess I am, but here they don't care. As long as you play hard, the town, the coach, the team, is Steve McMichael. I wouldn't want to be any other place." Unquote. Now, he said this right as he was in 1984. He had been a member of the Bears for a few years by that point. While he was with the Bears, two-time first-team All-Pro from 1985 and 1987, two-time second-team All-Pro selection, two-time Pro Bowl selection, one Super Bowl 20 with the Bears, and that one of the worst Super Bowls ever to be seen by human eyes. During his career, he had 849 career tackles, 95 sacks, 16 forced fumbles, 3 interceptions. He is a member of both the Pro Football and the College Football Hall of Fame. And during his career, he played 101 career consecutive starts. So, talking about this guy, when you think of Steve McMichael, I think of one of the most physical defensive linemen in the NFL. In fact, my son, which you see a picture of him behind me, watched film of Steve McMichael because he played defensive tackle, same as he did. And he watched a lot of film about Steve McMichael and stuff, and he tried to pattern his game after Steve. And when you think about that Bears team, you think of him, you think of Wilbur Marshall, Otis Wilson, Richard Dent, Dave Durison, of course, Iron Mike Singletary, of course, the ringleader of them all. When you think of the Chicago Bears and you think of that Bears team of 85, you're talking about some very, very physical monsters. They lived up to their moniker, the Monsters of the Midway.
yes, tremendous, tremendous, tremendous player, tremendous talent. And then also got to remember Dangerous Dan Hampton too.
Of course,
They
yes.
just because Hampton used to play on the inside and the outside, whereas McMichael played primarily that three technique on the inside. He could simultaneously plug that run, but then he could also get upfield and really disrupt that pocket and push that pocket and give chances to Richard Dent and Otis Wilson and Wilbur Marshall to really clean up from the outside, and then simultaneously they could keep the general of the entire thing, Mike Singletary, clean, so he was free to roam and pick which gap to fill in, and just phenomenal, just a phenomenal player, phenomenal talent, just ferocious, and he showed his ferocity not only during his career but also during his valiant battle with Lou Gehrig's disease as well. He just tried to just fought it as valiantly and as long as he could. And then, just a tremendous player. And then also another tidbit that you may or may not be aware of: when he was through playing, became a professional wrestler.
Yeah, I was just about to get into that, because I know that you are a fan of pro wrestling, and which I dabbled a little bit in my younger days, but I kind of strayed away from the faith, kind of so to speak. But talk about his pro wrestling career, because that's something that I found very interesting.
Yeah, he was part of the famous Four Horsemen stable. Now it was a far cry from the original lineup of Ric Flair, Ole, and Arn Anderson and Tully Blanchard with Baby Doll on the as his valet, and James J. Dillon as the mastermind on
Yeah.
the top titles, all of
Yeah.
the NBA titles that for he wanted himself very well, and did very well and attacked that with the same dedication and ferocity as he embarked upon everything else. So, will be greatly missed. And you said your son watched film of him. You can, yes, that's the man to watch, especially from that three technique. That's the man to
And
watch
that's
right
what he
there. He
played.
was
That's what my
those
son
Bears team
played.
was great.
Yeah.
Well,
Moving on.
mm,
Moving on.
yeah.
Go ahead.
I'd say if they had because everybody forget they was every bit as ferocious in '84 and '86. But you remember McMahon was hurt in '84. They had to start the back
Yeah.
of Steve Fuller. They went up to San Francisco and gave them all that they could handle, became short. Then in '86, they were on the march again. And that's when I forget the guy's name for the Bears. I mean, the Packers, but he cheap shotted Jim McMahon well after the play was over with, and he was
I
never the
remember
same.
watching
And
that
that
game.
kind of like,
I was at my aunt's house
mhm,
in Texas, and we were watching that game. The game was at Soldier Field, and so
yes,
I forgot the guy's name, but he talked about that for weeks. After that, and that's like one of the earmarks of the famed Packer Bears rivalry is one of the great inflection points of doing that time, especially since the Green Bay Packers were in their down years, during that time. And yeah, I remember watching that in at my aunt's house in Texas, and we were like, wow, that's it was a cheap shot, with that. And I'm glad you brought that up. I totally forgot about that. You're right. I totally forgot about that.
mm-hmm,
Moving
yes,
on
and
to, go ahead. No,
no, no,
moving on. Moving on to pro basketball. That's to say the playoffs are going on right now, and we have the Oklahoma City Thunder, who mercifully swept through the Memphis Grizzlies, who was without John Moran, shorthanded. You know, they're the youngest team in the NBA in the history of the NBA last year to have a number one seed in the conference finals. I mean, in the conference, have the number one seed, the youngest team. Last year they were 23.9 years of age, average age, which is the youngest all
wow,
time. This year they're the second youngest, just 24.9 years of age. Okay. And they are the youngest. And I want to go through a list of the youngest teams to win the NBA title. And I think this is a very interesting list, and a lot of these teams, I'm more than sure that the media thought that there was going to be the beginning of a dynasty. And a lot of these was not. A couple of them had a few years that were great years, but a few of them, not so much. Number 10, the 56-57 Celtics, of course, that was the beginning of a dynasty with Bill Russell, and Bill Russell, I think Bill Russell's rookie year with the Celtics, Bill Russell had young Bob Cousy, so forth and so on. Number 9, the 52-53 Lakers, they were 26.4 years of age. Number 8, the 2014-2015 Golden State Warriors. They were 26.3 years of age. And of course, everybody knows what happened with that team. They went on to win multiple championships in this past decade with Steph Curry and Trey Thompson, and Thompson and Draymond Green and whatever have you, and Steve Kerr is the coach. And so we talk about that for a sec.
just phenomenal. And it just those are some great teams. And OKC, they look like they're well on their way because they have everything you need. They got the bona fide superstar who can put the butts in seats and the ball in the hole, which is
Yeah,
that's very difficult to find in basketball. And then they just got a loaded young core in Holmgren, and then the Williams kid, and then they brought in a couple of nice young veterans in the Hardenstein, the guy from the Knicks,
Knicks, yeah.
hard hat, and then also the guy, what is his name? He used to play for the Lakers and the Bulls. He could what is that guy name? Oh man.
I know what you're talking about. I can't, I'm
Uh
drawing a blank right now.
What
Well,
is
I know
that boy's
exactly what
name?
you're talking about.
Yeah, they got a nice little mix of young. All of them are young, but players starting out, they've learned the ropes really quick, as well as some young veterans to give them the needed toughness and some experience that they've had as well. And then then you also got to think about in terms of these teams, the young teams that you mentioned. You got to mention the team that should have been, because you remember the exact same franchise. They were at this point back in 2012.
Yep.
They had Durant, Westbrook. They had James Harden as the sixth man, and then they decided for some reason, still unbeknownst to me, to let James Harden walk over $5 million while simultaneously retaining Kendrick Perkins. That never made any sense. That never made any sense to
And
me.
I can
And
just tell by the disdain in your voice that I've learned you, known you so long that the disdain in your voice, that was like a very, that was a move that you did not agree with.
oh, and it's like it's like they didn't see the landscape of where basketball was headed to the small ball lineups, because in a lot of respects, they were the Dubs before the Dubs. In a
Yeah, they
lot of
were. You're
respects,
right, they were.
they were the Dubs before the Dubs, and it's no reason they had gotten to the 2012 final, won game one, then lost four straight games to LeBron and the Heatles, and you thought, okay, although they lost, this is just the beginning, and then they never even got a chance to atone for that, because the team, between that move and then subsequent injuries to Durant and then Westbrook, then Durant left, they never really got a chance to fulfill the tremendous promise that they once had. And here they are back at this point. So let's just hope that this time they get it right.
Yeah. Continuing with the list of the youngest teams to win NBA championships, staying in the Bay Area for number 7, the 74-75 Warriors. That was the Rick Barry, Al Attles coach Warriors that shocked the world and beat the 59-win Washington Bullets with Wes Unseld and Elvin Hayes, which is considered one of the biggest upsets in NBA Finals history, and is also the first finals in any pro sports to feature two black head coaches. You had Al Attles, the head coach of the Warriors, and you had Casey Jones, the head coach of the Bullets. So that was, and I actually did a podcast episode just on that subject, just on those finals. Also, number 6, the 70-71 Bucks with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. They're on the list, 26 years of age average. Lucius Allen, of course, you had Oscar Robertson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, head coach by Larry Costello. They swept the Bullets. Again, another sweep for the Bullets. Yeah, I know that your Washington, D.C. heart might be hurting a little bit. Anyway, number 5, heading into the top 5 now. Number 5, the 51-52 Lakers, 25.9 years of age. Number 4, the 54-55 Syracuse Nationals, a team, of course, you now know of as the Philadelphia 76ers. That was with Dolph Schayes and pitching Paul Arizin, I think, was on that team as well. No, he was with the Warriors. I'm sorry. That was Dolph Schayes for sure with the Syracuse Nationals in 54-55. Now the top 3. Number 3, at the age of 25.7 years of age, the 79-80 Los Angeles Lakers. And of course, Magic Johnson jumping center for Game 7 in place of Kareem. Now, as a big misnomer about this game, Magic Johnson did not play center the whole game. They basically played positionless basketball. He just jumped center. And Norm Nixon was the point guard for the most of the game, and Magic played off guard. They basically played positionless basketball, just 5 guys on the court with no set position. So that was and everybody say, well, Magic played center that game. No, that's not right. He basically he jumped center in place of Kareem, but he was basically the primary scorer for that game, him and Jamal Wilkes.
Yes, giving it to Caldwell Jones, just giving it to him.
Yep.
I still, I was a Dr. J man. That was a little bit before my time, because the '82 final was the first one that I remembered, which the Sixers lost to. But but it just
that went 6 games, didn't it? That series.
But 80 and 82 both went 6 games, and then the Sixers finally
won it the next year by sweeping the Lakers when they got Malone and 4-4-4.
Yes, they finally broke through, So that was just giving it. Question for you, which you
Uh,
may know, 71 Bucks. Did that team have, if I remember correctly, did they have Bobby Dandridge too?
no, Bobby Dandridge, I think was. Well, I think he was with them. I think he
I think
was.
he
I
was
think
with
he might
them
have been a
first before he went to the
rookie.
Bullets, right?
Yeah, he
Or
went to the Bullets later. He went to the
yeah,
Bullets later and won that championship with the Bullets in '78. But I
correct.
think he was with the. I want to say I know he was on the '74 team that
Okay,
played the
okay,
Celtics and lost to the Celtics in seven. But
okay,
I want to say he. I'm not particularly sure that he was. I think he might have still been at Norfolk State in
okay,
'71. You
okay.
know, with him and Pee Wee Kirkland together. Which is
Ballers.
yeah, seriously. Pee Wee Kirkland, let me tell you.
Ballers, man. Just imagine, man, that 70, just imagine the 71 Bucks, man. Even though Oscar Robinson was on the back nine,
Yep.
he's still Oscar Robinson for God's sakes. Then Lou Alcindor,
Yeah.
it doesn't get any better. And then they could have had they were saying had Julius Erving not opted for the ABA, he would have been on the Bucks too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think he was his draft rights in the NBA was with the Hawks. But the Hawks
Okay,
already had Pete Maravich, if I'm not
correct.
mistaken. They already had Pete Maravich. So I think he would have been traded to the Bucks or whatever. But I remember that saying that he could have been with the Milwaukee Bucks, which would have been ridiculous, almost unfair. You know.
Correct. Correct.
All right, finishing up the list, number two, the 55-56 Warriors. This was the Philadelphia Warriors, and the aforementioned person of pitching Paul Arizin, who was one of the key players for the Philadelphia Warriors that season, and the number one team, the youngest team to ever win an NBA championship. And I know this team particularly well, the 76-77 Portland Trailblazers with Bill Walton, Maurice Lucas, um, Bobby Gross, Lionel Hollins, you know,
Jack Ramsey is the coach.
yeah, Dr. Jack Ramsey was the coach. That was, I mean, and that one of the things I always remember about that series, for one, is Dr. J's dunk on Bobby Gross, which is one of the nastiest dunks on anybody in the history of mankind. If you can, go to YouTube, and whoever's listening, go to YouTube and see Dr. J over Bobby Gross in the '77 finals. And it was one of the most ridiculous dunks ever. And another thing that I remember is the back-to-back alley-oops to Bill Walton to pretty much put the game away in game six. And yeah, the Trailblazers were down 2-0 to Philadelphia, and Philly had Dr. J. Also had one of the refugees, another refugee from the ABA, George McGinnis. He
Mm-hmm.
had World Be Free. He had a
Mm-hmm.
young Henry Bibby. You had a young Doug Collins. And that team was loaded, but for whatever reason, Dr. Jack Ramsey devised the game plan and got his team over the hump and got them past the Sixers for their only NBA championship.
Yeah, the master at work, man. One of, if not perhaps the greatest coach. Dr. Jack, and then Bill Walton passed a few months ago.
Yeah,
And a lot of people look at his career as what could have been in terms of the injuries and all of that. But at his peak, you can pretty put him up. You can pretty much put him up against anybody at his
yeah.
peak because he was that
If
good.
it wasn't for the injuries, we could have had like multiple championships for the Blazers. If
Correct.
it hadn't
He
been for
was
the injuries,
just that.
because I think they had a better record in '78, right before he got injured, which cost him the season, than they had in '77.
Correct. And he was just tremendous player. Then the aforementioned enforcer Maurice Lucas. Because I think if I remember correctly, at the end of game two or early in game three, he and George McGinnis were about to throw hands, and then the entire tenor of the series
Changed.
switched.
Yeah,
It switched on that point. So the
yeah,
old
exactly.
Maurice Lucas, because you're not going to outgun a Maurice Lucas. It's just
No,
not going to
no, you're
happen.
not gonna do that.
So
Yeah, we have a few more minutes to go, and we're just going to end it up with baseball here. And it's just one of the things I like to find on social media is find just different stats from about Major League Baseball teams and just different teams in general throughout all the sports. And one of the ones I found that was very interesting was the last time each major league team lost 100 games. And I found this very interesting because when you think of teams that lose 100 games and you think of like the great teams that have won championships, you have to go back some years whenever they lost 100 games. For example, the 1912 New York Yankees was the last time the Yankees lost 100 games was 1912. You know, but that's not the record. 1908 was the last time both the Dodgers and the Cardinals lost 100 games, which lets you know that those three teams are talk about stability.
Interesting.
You know, there's one team throughout its entire history that has never lost 100 games. Throughout their entire history, never lost 100 games.
Angels.
The Angels, which I found that
Angels,
hard.
yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
is the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, east of Rancho Cucamonga, and north of Torrance, what I like to call them, because they change their name so often, you know. But the Angels, I mean, you think about it with Don Baylor and Rod Carew, and you know, with Rod Carew was late in his career, and guys like Bobby Witt and Fred Lynn and Darren Erstad and Tim Salmon, they've had some really great players to come through there, but they've never really won like talking about.
Yeah, I think they won once, right?
They won in 2002.
Like in the early 2000s.
They won in
Didn't they beat
2002.
Barry
They beat the
Bonds?
Giants. They beat the Giants in
Yeah,
seven.
okay.
They beat the
But
Giants
that's
in
been it.
seven. But
Yeah.
you think, but you know, but they had some. I mean, Bobby Witt, and of course the tragic story of Donnie Moore. What happened to him in '86? Another great series.
Yes.
You know, in '86, the Angels was one strike away from going to the World Series, and they give up a 2-run home run to Dave Henderson to force a Game 7, which forced extra innings, which ultimately the Red Sox win to force a Game 7, in which the Angels got blown out in Game 7. So, you know, which was really, really tragic.
I
But
was watching that game. I was watching that game as it happened.
oh man, yeah, so was I, you know, and then of course that was like the day before the epic Mets Astros game that we talked about a couple days ago on the phone. No, I think that was like either the next day or earlier that day or something like that, where it was just madness, you know, going with 16 innings, you know, because they did not want to face Mike Scott in Game 7.
They knew they were done. They were fighting. They were fighting if their life depended on it, because it did. Because if they had to go back to Houston for Mike Scott, they were done. They knew it, because he had easily throttled them twice earlier in the series. I mean, he had like I think his ERA was probably less than 1 in the previous 2 starts, and they
Yeah.
just, you know, he was just.
I think he pitched a
unhittable that day.
shutout in Game 1. Either
Correct.
Game 1 or Game 2 against the Mets at Shea. He pitched a shutout.
Correct. He was just a monster with that, because he could bring it 95 plus, then drop that splitter that fell off the table, fell off a
Yep.
cliff almost, and it just was nothing that they could do about it, you know. So yes, you know, yeah.
But anyway, man, Chuck, I really, really appreciate you doing this, and I'm looking forward to doing a lot more of these. And I'm very, very thankful that you wanted to come on with me and talk about sports. And I got a couple of ideas in the hopper that I'm gonna shoot to you. I think we can come out with one of these like every couple of weeks, and I hope you're down with that.
Man, I'm down with it. And once again, I'm so grateful, thankful, and honored for you to even consider me for this. And I had a great time, not only this time, but my couple of guest appearances I had a couple of years ago. Thoroughly enjoyed those as well. And just, look forward to chopping it up with my brother on the regular, and just having a lot of fun, man. It should be a lot of fun. Here for the ride.
All right, man, but I really appreciate that. I'm going to close the show out in a minute. You're listening to the historically, can we get the title, the name, or can we get the title of the podcast right? Historically Speaking Sports Podcast right here on the Sports History Network. Thank you, Chuck, for joining me.
You're welcome. Anytime.
And sports fans, that will do it for this edition of the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast. Thank you for taking time out of your day to give us a listen. And also, I'd like to send a heartfelt shout out to my boy, my best friend, Charles Combs, for agreeing to joining us as a co-host of the new and improved Historically Speaking Sports Podcast. This podcast, once again, comes to you from the Bill King Memorial Studio in the sports wing of TM4 Enterprises, located in suburban Atlanta in the shadow of Stone Mountain. To get more content of the Historically Speaking Sports Podcast, you can check us out on Blue Sky, on Threads, or Twitter X, or wherever you get your podcasts of choice. And you could also send us a line at historically.speaking.sports@gmail.com. And also, if you have not done so already, please subscribe to the show. Tell your family, tell your friends, hell, tell your neighbors. Heck, you can even tell a passerby on the street about us if you really think that they like sports history. And until the next episode, please stay blessed, stay cool, and be your best in everything that you do. It will make this world a much, much better place. Peace.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.